Hello, everybody. A very warm welcome to Wine with Jimmy. This is an educational channel that's designed to help those of you in the world of wine understand it more so you can get to your exams and smash it out of the park. So welcome to a series here for the WSET Level 4 Diploma. This is the D3 section on wines of the world and looking at the south of France. So south of France is split into 4 series, as you'll see here. Languedoc, sort of background information, Languedoc appellations, and then everything about Roussillon and everything about Provence. So it's split into 4 series. Here we're looking at series 1, and we're going to begin with the introduction, history and climate of Languedoc. So do hold on, and I'll be getting straight into that very shortly. Just before I do, if you have any comments or any questions or any concerns, you can get in touch with me by commenting on this video below. And if you have a little bit of spare time, click the like button and click subscribe. All those things help more of this educational content on the world of YouTube. You can also get in touch via the social media that you see at the bottom of every slide. So let's begin and look at the world of Languedoc. Here we go. So yes, we're going to start with our introduction here to this wonderful part of France, of course. Now, here in the south of France, we're going to be talking about Languedoc, Roussillon, and Provence in this area. So the first 2 series are going to be exclusively about Languedoc. Now, the former administrative region of Languedoc-Roussillon, that since 2016 has been part of the wider Occitan administrative area, has been treated into 2 parts. So we have the Languedoc, which is the departments of Aude, Hérault, and also Gard. So in fact, these are your this area here, the dark green area I'm identifying with Montpellier. You have the area here, this lighter green one with Nîmes, and then up here going into the mountains around Mende is the Languedoc zone, and then Roussillon is in fact your departments of down on the Pyrenees Orientales in the southern section. So that is around Peu-Pérignon, for example. So yes, they're our kind of administrative zones of the south of France. Now, it's a large old area. It's 240,000 hectares under vine. So that means it's bigger than South Africa. It's bigger than Chile, and it's bigger than Australia. 220,000, so 90% of these vines fall into the Languedoc zone. So it's really the big focus area. Hence why it's split into 2 series on the on this part. So a few things to go into this. One common factor between all of the regions which hug the Mediterranean coast is the low yields for AOC wines, Appellation Origine Contrôlée wines. And this is due to low rainfall and warm climatic conditions, but also windy conditions. If you've been anywhere down in the south of France, like Montpellier, Narbonne, Carcassonne, Peu-Pérignon, all these areas are commonly affected by multiple winds. Some of the cities by the Mistral, others by the Tramontane. There are winds that come from the mountains, the Pyrenees, the winds that come off the Mediterranean Sea. So it's a very windy zone. So the fact that you've got sunshine, lots of warmth, but a lack of rainfall, and then wind which can then dry up grapes, desiccate grapes, means that generally lower yields for the AOC wines. All of these factors, though, sunlight, lack of rainfall, windy conditions, specifically the latter, causes more evapotranspiration, which means that you generally have lower yields in the grapes. A survey of yields for AOC wines in 2005 to 2015 found that Languedoc-Roussillon had the lowest yields in the whole of the French regions, roughly half of that of Champagne or Alsace. So some low yields for the AOC wines specifically. So the name of Languedoc is quite interesting. It actually references the language of Oc. That's where Languedoc comes from. And that Oc comes from Occitan, which is the local dialect, the local culture down in this area. The word Oc, so O and C, which comes from Occitan, actually means yes. So therefore, we're talking about this being the language of yes in this area. Now, some scholars and some elders, I suppose, can speak Occitan, but if you put a Parisian and an Occitane together, they would not be able to understand each other for most of the dialect. So it is quite an interesting area. And of course, you're going to think about mixes here. This is the language that has been born from Greek influence, Roman influence, chivalry, and then Catalan influence. There's a lot of different things that happen down in this area. And also, if you think about it, also in terms of the actual direct translation, the language of yes, it is a very forward and free thinking area of France. And certainly that translates into winemaking because it is a really flexible area for winemaking. Lots of different varieties, bigger yields, more blending formulas allowed. It's quite forward thinking. You will see that in a lot of the labeling as well. There's a lot of modern, new wave types of labeling. Maybe it's the old gits and the old tarts, or the utter bastards, the complete bastards, those kind of things that you found across the board. So a little bit of the history just here. The Languedoc region borders the Mediterranean, of course. And of course, because of that connection, it was impacted by those nations who traversed the seas during the ancient times. So in 600 BC, Greeks landed in the south of France, and they brought viticultural know-how, which they had really taken and learned from Phoenicians, and then from wider to the east from Mesopotamia. Now, this introduction of formal viticulture started more viticulture, and it spread very quickly throughout the southern province. And here's just some arrows pointing to you of some of the trade routes between the ancient Greek cities and its further colonies. The Romans arrived in the south of France in 125 BC, and they built the first road in France, calling it the Via Domitia, which is named after, of course, Domitius, who was the emperor at the time. And this connects Italy to Spain, going through southern France. And of course, because this was an important commerce way, a trade route, towns and villages, and of course, agricultural production would prosper around this road, and vineyards were planted on both sides of the road. The road quickly became the main trade route for wine transporting across parts of the Roman Empire. The vine took so well to this area, as we know from Greek existence beforehand, that wine was quickly then carted down to the Roman Empire. And under the edict of Domitius, so the Via Domitia, where that comes from, or Domitius, however you wish to say it. Sorry, my ancient Latin is probably not as good as it should be. The wine trade was hastily curtailed by the Roman Empire in an effort to protect local Roman produce and goods. So protectionists laws were passed around that time. Languedoc then was really stifled. The production was stifled at that point. Then Rome fell, of course, at the end of the 5th century, and Europe entered what we call the Dark Ages after that. And that brings me to my next slide here. So we then have the emergence of the church, certainly along Lots of monasteries, churches, and abbeys started to be prosperous at this time, often giving a safe haven and hope for a lot of the populace. The monasteries revitalized viticulture as it did in many parts of France. And of course, the Catholic Church was a prime candidate and consumer for wine. From 1204 to 1349, 1204 to 1349, Montpellier, which is the city really kind of in the heart of Languedoc, along the coast towards Nîmes, was considered a part of the Aragonese Empire and was ruled by Barcelona. And the Count of Barcelona were very, very strong in terms of seafaring. And this is important, certainly in terms of really cementing a style that started to emerge from this area. And that was produced by the chap who is on the left-hand side. This is Arnaud de Villeneuve. So that's his name down it, Arnaud Villeneuve. And it says at the bottom in common writing. So he was an alchemist and physician in Montpellier, who is said to have discovered the art of mutage. And mutage is the addition of grape spirit into wine to fortify it. And this is in 1285, significantly before the port and sherry trades. So it was something which was created here, and there's still very much an important fortified trade in this area. And that, of course, is the vin doux natural trade. But it began here in this area and was adopted by many European nations. And it began here linking to that Count of Barcelona in terms of the trade and transport of the goods here. Fortification would enable better transport on ships. Then we have in the 1530s, 1531, we have those very fastidious and studious monks, this time at the Abbey of Saint-Hilaire, which is actually in that label there, discovering a sparkling wine, calling it Blanquette de Limoux. But this was the first traditional sparkling wine from France, a good 150 years before Dom Pérignon and Champagne, of course. We then further go into the Renaissance. So in 1681, the first half of the Canal de Midi opens. And this connects the Mediterranean port of Sète, which you see on the far right-hand side of your picture, to the Garonne River in Toulouse. Up here, as you can see, and this is the Garonne River, which actually comes from the Pyrenees. So you have this red section here connecting Sète to the Garonne River, and then, of course, that means that it then has connection to Bordeaux city above that. So therefore, this created an opportunity in terms of trade. The wine was able to get to more foreign markets, as at that point, remember, there was no railroad. There was the road, but no cars, of course. So this was therefore the quickest transport at the time. But unfortunately for the south of France, they had to compete with Bordeaux city and the winemakers of Bordeaux, who really were in control of the port of Bordeaux, and they enacted protectionist laws to protect their products against the sale of things like these cheaper wines from Languedoc. So despite this wonderful bit of transport connection, it was not beneficial for Languedoc in the long run. But the French railway started to get established in the middle of the 19th century. 1855 connects Paris, Lyon, and Marseille together, and that allows the wines of this area to go via Marseille and up to markets like Lyon and Paris. And that was at much lower cost, much quicker transport, of course, on the train network. And as a result, Languedoc's wine production quadrupled in the next quarter of a century. So that's basically from 1855 up to about 1880 at that time. And that leads us into another time here. In 1863, phylloxera hits the south of France. And it's during a phase of expansion, remember, due to the railway connection. The key thing here is that where most regions were very slow to react to replanting onto American rootstocks, Languedoc was kind of considered the experimental area, and let's just do it all there first, see what happens, and then if it's successful, then fine. The key thing about that is Languedoc, therefore, was first on replanting, mass replantation onto American rootstocks, and therefore the first really to start filtering into the markets with big sizable productions which were consistent, whereas other regions were slower to react, like Burgundy and Bordeaux, for example. And in fact, by 1900, which is coming towards the end of the phylloxera pandemic, the Languedoc area in France had become France's #1 supplier of wine, responsible for nearly half of the production of French wine, which is a whopping number. More modern times here for you. So the development of local winemaking cooperatives in the modern times, so we're talking around the 1930s, became a really strong part of the industry here. And it led to a tradition of bulk sort of table wine production from the area. Now, a cooperative is a business model that allows small growers to cooperate together and use a member-owned winery for production purposes. So, of course, they sell grapes, maybe they sell wine or grape must, but it's normally grapes. They get paid for it, and they do this every year. And then there are set winemakers at the co-op which will make a certain range of wine styles. So yeah, it's quite important. The first French wine cooperative was created in 1905, and that's in Maroussan near Montpellier. And today we have around 150 cooperatives in the Languedoc alone. In the 1950s, so this is 45, 50 years after the creation of the first cooperative, cooperatives in Languedoc accounted for 90% of the total production. Today, it's about 70%, but still really, really significant. Climatically, the Languedoc is a Mediterranean climate with very high levels of sunshine, rainfall which is quite low, below 600 millimeters per year, and very warm and dry summers. This, of course, is exceptionally favorable for grape production. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there are lots of different wind patterns which affect the area. So low moisture levels, and then things like the cold, dry Tramontana northwest wind that blows for about 200 days of the year mean that there is very low disease pressure. Remember, we're generally looking at this area here, so kind of like Narbonne, Béziers, Sète, Montpellier. The Mistral has a bit of effect on places like Montpellier, but we're majorly looking at the Tramontana wind. Now, low disease pressure means, of course, a reduction of fungal diseases, and therefore there is a reduced need to spray against these fungal diseases. So that, of course, in turn means that organic production is quite possible in this area. And there you are. Increased organic production. So we'll find that it's actually responsible for about a third of France's total production. But there is something to be said about the exceptionally dry years they can have during summer, which can cause considerable amounts of stress on the vine. So irrigation may be something which is needed in combatant to that. So really, that's the first video done. A bit of a larger one here, about 20 odd minutes. I do hope you've enjoyed sort of learning about the history of Languedoc and then a few things around the climate and weather as well. Please do join me for part 2 for the key grape variety of this area. which is Carignan. This, as along with parts 3 and 4, is only available on my e-learning portal. That's www.winewithjimmy.com. Please go along, sign up, and get all of that access to exclusive content, including more videos, written questions, short written answers, multiple choice maps, and all those kind of things. If you do have any comments, questions, or concerns, please do get in touch. You can comment on this video below. Please make sure you click like and subscribe. And if you find yourself in London, in the United Kingdom, then please come and see me for a class, a glass, or of course, a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Ciao for now. Goodbye.